Well, this, as many of you will already realise, is the edge of Lound Wood, just outside the village of Eakring, which is visible just between the small wood in front, the Lound Wood Annex, and Lound Wood itself, which is on the left here. I've chosen this part because I'm hoping that it's going to be less breezy. There's an easterly breeze this evening. It's not the most exciting of conditions. There has been a heavy shower of rain in between Market Water, where I live, and Eakring here, but Eakring's not had the amount of rain that the villages of Edwinstowe and Ollerton appear to have had. So I'm hoping that we'll get a few moths. This is the first trapping session of May, yet it feels more like March, to be honest. Although the temperature's not forecasted to be too bad. There's a fairly clear sky at the moment. There is a frontal system which is coming up from the south or southwest, I believe, and whether it stays dry or not, I don't know. But one of the main reasons I'm here is to test out this. I have a new generator, thanks to the generosity of my father and my brother, who have bought this Sensi. It's an 1100 watt to 1200 watt generator, and the model is SC1400i. It's an inverter generator, so it's much lighter than the old one. The old generator actually weighed 4 stone, which I think is at 50 kilograms or something like that, and it felt every ounce and pound and stone of it. This is half that weight. It means I can carry it quite easily with one hand, and is far better. So tonight is intended to give this a trial run, as well as hopefully try and catch a few moths. So with a slowly darkening sky, I think it's time to get this thing up and running. Well, I've had this generator probably getting on towards 3 weeks now, just not had a decent enough night to try it out. I did start it up briefly when it first arrived, but otherwise this is its first proper run. Isn't it quiet compared to the other noisy one? So under darkening skies, we'll switch the light on and see what we get. Well, it works, and the generator, if it's run on economy, which you may well try once this is warmed up, is even quieter than that. Compared to the old ones that I've had, the 2 generators, it hardly sounds as though there's a generator at all. What have I been missing? And this generator seems to represent excellent value for money. Lovely jubbly. Well, as you can see, we're up and running. The MV bulb is at full brightness. So let's hope for a few moths dropping in. Perhaps there's a carpet just flying at the side of me while I'm rattling on. But anyway, it is the 4th of May today. Already we're well into spring now, but we are a couple of weeks behind, or certainly a week behind, I think, in the flight times of many species and in the amount of leaf coverage on the trees still. But we'll see what we get. It's just gone 2100 hours for those that like those little technical details. All we need now are a few moths and a cup of coffee. I've got coffee today. I thought I'd live dangerously and have a change. Well, here's a shot that I've never been able to bring you before, because otherwise you wouldn't have heard my delicate little voice over the old generator, but hopefully this one you can. It's so quiet, the difference to me is unbelievable, but that's after having 20 years of loud portable frame generators, also very heavy, so carrying this is no problem to me health wise. It's great, but it runs well, certainly on the basis so far I'd recommend it. But that's the scene. The light is on. We're awaiting the first moth to come into the light. It'll probably be a Geometridae moth that flutters around, but how many moths we get, I've no idea. It is generally clear at the moment. There's a bit of low cloud. I suspect that some low cloud may come in off the North Sea and make it quite misty and murky, but that will hold the temperature up. Hopefully we'll get a few moths to keep us entertained. Well, we have a moth in, and it's a surprise because it's a migrant species and it's a silver Y. Now, personally, this is an early date for me for silver Y in Nottinghamshire. Have had it in April, certainly once, but it's come as a complete surprise. And that's probably about as good a view as we'll get. It is active, the wings are vibrating, so it'll soon be off, but I'm chuffed with that. Silver Y, a very common migrant moth, and is partially resident, I believe, now in the UK. Now, you may remember the video I did just after Christmas, or just before Christmas, of the one that I found recently emerged on the yard. Well, just the one silver Y in so far, but there's a bit more cloud. Usually with this type of weather, it's still just about anticyclonic and it's dragged easterly winds in. And normally in these conditions, as soon as darkness descends, any blue sky is infilled by what they used to call HAH, if I remember right, H-A-A-H, coming in off the North Sea. Be nice if it does cloud up, which they do forecast it to. It'll hide the moon, which I can't see at the moment, and just keeps that temperature up. But May's a funny month for moths. Although you get more species as you're going further into the spring, you tend to get less moths at the trap. So whereas a month ago or 2 months ago you could get 100 and 200 moths of about 10 species, but now you can probably get 30 species on a May night and maybe not even get 100 moths. Although commoner pugs such as brindle pugs do tend to bolster the numbers. Well, second moth's just come in, and it's a micro moth, and it's turned out to be a diamond-backed moth of all things. So 2 moths in, both migrants. Neither were born and bred on these shores and have recently arrived. Conditions are quite decent for migration from further south beyond the UK's shores. Who knows what else will come in, but probably nothing, to be honest, because May isn't a brilliant month for migrants in Nottinghamshire anyway, but the odd things can turn up. But I have just had a brindled pug knocking around, so that's 3 moths, and we're well over half an hour into this trapping session, and it does feel more mild now. It doesn't feel as cool as it did when I first got here, but that's probably because it's now clouded over. There's no sign of the near full moon, so conditions are quite good. Although after heavy rain, if the skies are clear, that temperature drops, and it usually puts off most invertebrate activity, and especially moths, to be honest. But some promising signs. Just coming up to an hour of this trapping session, had a couple more bits come in, namely a male lunar marbled brown, which hasn't settled down yet. Nothing's settled down, so I can't show you anything sort of physically, but I can drop photos in, of course. But as a general rule, there's nothing flying. This is the entrance to Lound Wood. It's sheltered, faces westerly, so it's ideally situated and a great place to trap if the wind is coming from the east, which it is this evening. But that breeze has dropped, and normally what you'd get male moths flying up and down the outside here. It's quite surprising sometimes. You don't seem to think that male moths will have territories, but it seems that they do. Butterflies do, male butterflies do. So it seems only right that male moths will do as well. They'll have their own territories which they'll patrol. Very difficult though to actually determine whether that's fact or not. But from the evidence that Dillis and I saw over the years when we was trapping here, a lot of moths came up and down here. A lot would come out of here. And because there's not many moths around, it gives me time to arm myself with the old trusty net. And I can look for the moths coming up here, rather than sitting constantly by the light, which is nice because it means that if I'm kept busy kneeling down against the light, there's plenty of moths. But sometimes it's nice to have the opportunity to, catch moths with one of these. Not all moths will come to an MV light. A lot of Geometridae moths certainly won't come to MV light, but female moths don't like light. Very rare that they'll plonk into an MV light, so you can catch female moths while they're looking for sites to lay eggs. But there's just nothing flying. Not even any insects. Very few insects have come on the ground sheet. A couple of small crane flies, but that's about it. Very quiet, yet it don't feel cold. Well, many of the pugs look very much one like another, to be honest. But this is oak tree pug. It's smaller, slightly smaller than brindled pug. Brindled pug usually dominates any trap in the months of late March and April, and as April goes on, oak tree pug tends to take over. There are subtle differences, but this is noticeably smaller than most brindled pugs. But either way, oak tree pug isn't marked brilliantly, so always very difficult to tell. But we're coming now to the end of the flight period for a brindled pug. There's been a couple in, and they're rather on the tatty side. So that's Oak Tree Pug, one of the few moths that settled down. Now here's an absolutely beauty of a moth. Look, this, although it's just various shades of browns and almost black markings, it's absolutely beautiful. This is a waved umber, an unusual shaped moth, quite distinctive species on shape alone here in Nottinghamshire during the month of May, and pretty much wherever you're trapped this moth will turn up. I get it regularly at home when I trap there during May and probably just into June, but this is an absolute cracker. Just look at that for markings. But very common. I say one that you'll soon attract to your garden trap, no doubt, but certainly in a woodland setting such as here at Lound Wood at Eakring, it's a common enough species, but you don't get it to light in any numbers, but it usually invariably turns up on each trapping session during the month of May. But it's an absolute belter of a moth. So that's waved umber. Now this little corker's just dropped in. This is a Chinese character. Again, this is one of those moths that you can almost identify just on shape and resting posture alone. But it's not very large. If I put my famous grubby forefinger, you'll see that this is no massive hook-sized species. Small and diminutive, but characteristically marked. Apparently, the markings are meant to form a Chinese character shape. I can't see it myself, it just looks like a dirty smudge, but it's a beautiful little moth, this. So that's Chinese character. It's very common, but another moth that will never turn up at a light trap in any real numbers. Overall, it's very quiet. I can't say disappointing because there was the rain or the shower sometime before I arrived here. It always has an effect. It does early in the year when the temperature drops behind any rain that goes through. Some of the best nights trapping you'll ever have can be when it's drizzling. I've even had fantastic nights at home when it's been torrential rain. We've had almost thunderstorms, and you'll be surprised how many moths come thudding into the light in torrential rain. It's quite amazing really, but those nights are all very special. But early spring, you get a shower of rain or a front that goes across, inevitably it still turns quite cool after it, and insects just don't fly much. And I think that's largely the case of what's happening this evening. But I do have one more moth to show you, and that's a grey pine carpet which is coming. And this is grey pine carpet, nothing spectacular, but beautifully marked in various shades of greys and browns. It's very difficult to determine this species from spruce carpet at times, but grey pine carpet is by far the commonest. Certainly has a couple of broods a year, and this will turn up during the late autumn. But it's still a well-marked species. Quite often when these come into the light, they won't hold the wings flat like this, and they'll sit with the wings held upright in sort of butterfly fashion up over the thorax and the abdomen. but then eventually they'll settle down. But it's a beautifully marked moth, so that's grey pine carpet, and that's a moth which will turn up for those of you running suburban traps. Well, it's just coming up to 11 o'clock, which means I've been here 2 hours, and I'm quite happy to call it a day. The main aim of coming out tonight was to test the generator to see how well it performed, and it's performed brilliantly for the 2 hours that I've been here. But the number of moths is quite low, and it's quite typical this for May. When May comes, you tend to be all excited and think that it's going to be moths, and even more moths. On many occasions it'll turn out to be far from the case. You'll get more species, as I've mentioned before, but often smaller numbers of moths. But it's an improving situation as you go throughout May, and once you get into June, then it really is moths, and more moths than you can handle. So there's not a lot flying. We've not done particularly well for species, but we've managed to get a few. There's one near the car now, so I'll have a look to see what that is and probably start and pack up. So that's it. It's a nice sky.